Hey chums, and welcome back to the Kenwood Kids Club. I do hope you all had an absolutely amazing Halloween. Did anyone have a go at Lily's fantastic Halloween cake that we uploaded last week? I love how she took that basic chocolate cake recipe and really just kind of brought it to life with all those amazing decorations, and it was so simple. I'm definitely going to have a go at it. What I also love is that it wasn't just strictly a Halloween cake. Just with a couple of simple tweaks you could change it to make it suit any theme at all. So if you fancy having a go at it, head to our channel video listings and just click last week's video. In this week's video, I'm going to be showing you how to make some super easy bread rolls. Now, this is a recipe that, I'll be honest with you, I make at least a couple of times a week because it's so easy and simple. It doesn't take long at all, and they are absolutely delicious bread rolls. If it's your first time watching one of our videos here, then I'll just let you know that you'll find all the ingredients you need to bake along with me down in the video description. And while you're down there, you'll also find a link to the Kenwood Kids Club website. Yet we're not just a YouTube channel, we also have a whole website stuffed full of recipes, hints, tips, and even more besides. And you can even sign up as a member, which means you'll get your own membership card through the post, and you'll be eligible to enter our Star Baker of the Month competitions. I'll tell you more about those later on. But again, if it's your first time watching as well, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and of course hit that big red subscribe button before you go today. Now, as I said, all the ingredients you need are down there in the video description, so pause the video here, go and get everything ready, and then we can get cracking. Now, in the recipe over on the Kenwood Kids Club website, I've shown you what to do if you don't have a stand mixer like this one I've got here. But if you do have one, then I'm going to show you how this recipe can be made even easier, if that was at all possible. I mean, the recipe's called Easy Bread Rolls, so maybe I should call this video Easier Bread Rolls. I'm going to start by taking the bowl off the stand mixer. You might need to get an adult to help you with that if you've got this mixer, because these glass bowls are quite heavy, but they're really good for showing you what's going on inside. Now into this bowl, I'm going to add 500 grams of strong white bread flour. Now, bread flour is higher in gluten than the kind of plain flour or self-raising flour that we use when we're making cakes. And what that's going to do is give us a really stretchy dough that when it bakes will be really soft and packed full of air. I really love these rolls. I don't know if I've mentioned that enough yet, but they are so yummy. The thing that makes them yummy, oddly enough, is salt. Because actually, when you're making bread, there's not really a lot that goes in there. You've got your flour, we've got some yeast, which we'll talk about in a second. But other than that, that's pretty much it. So salt with that flour really brings all the flavour, so you don't want to skip this step at all. I've got 2 teaspoons of salt going in there. And then I've got yeast, and I'm using fast action instant dried yeast, which is my favourite kind to use because it's so simple, so easy to get hold of at any supermarket, and it even comes already portioned out for you as well. In here, there is a 7-gram sachet and a 7-gram sachet, and so for this recipe we're going to use 2, which is 14 grams of yeast. Now that might seem like quite a lot for those of you that have baked bread before even, but the reason why we're using so much is these rolls only have a very short proving time, so we need to give it as much help as possible to give us a really lovely rise. And to do that, we're going to add 14 grams of yeast. So all you need to do, grab your scissors, cut the top off, and then you can pour that yeast straight into the bowl as well. Now, yeast is actually alive. And so we need to give the yeast some food that will help it do its job, which is help our bread to rise. And the food we're going to give it is some sugar. So again, 2 teaspoons of sugar. And then the only other ingredient that needs to go in here is some water. And I'm using some kind of vaguely warm, we call it lukewarm water. And I've got 330 millilitres. And that's going to make quite a wet dough, but that's absolutely fine because that's what I want. If you're doing this without a mixer, you can now just get in here with your hands or with a wooden spoon and give it a really good mix until everything comes together. But if you are using a mixer, grab your K-beater, pop it on. I'm just going to mix this for around about 1 minute until everything is fully combined. It helps if you turn the power on. I'm only turning it up to speed number 1 on my K-mix here because with bread you never need to go higher than that, whether you're mixing or kneading or what have you. Number 1 is the maximum that you need. Now it's already been less than a minute, but can you see? This has already come together into one big lump, and that's what I was looking for. So once you get to this stage, pull all that dough off your K-beater, let it fall back into the bowl, and you should find you've got a really, really sticky dough, like that. Now I'm going to take the K-beater off the mixer, and I'm going to replace it with the dough hook. And the dough hook looks like this. What this is going to do is knead my dough for me, so I don't need to knead it by hand. Again, if you don't have a mixer like this, simply take the ball out of the bowl you combined your ingredients in, and then hold one end with one hand and push away with the other hand. Fold it back on itself, turn it slightly, and push again. And we have done kneading in other recipes before. Today we're going to use the dough hook on the mixer, and so again I'm going to turn it back on to number 1, and I'm going to leave this running for about 7 minutes. If you're doing it by hand, I want you to knead for 10 minutes, and what I usually do is set a timer on my phone, or I find a video on YouTube that's about 10 minutes long, and I just watch that while I'm kneading. Now your mixer might do what mine's doing here, but don't worry, that's fine. It's a very solid mixer and it can easily cope with a job like this. So we're going to leave this kneading. I'm going to give my hands a quick wash, and then after that 7 minutes we'll come back together and I'll tell you what to do next. Okay, so after that 7 minutes of kneading, or 10 minutes if you're doing it by hand, you should find that your dough is a lot smoother than it was, and it should be a little bit less sticky. It's still going to be fairly sticky because there's quite a lot of water in this mix, but what you'll also find is it's quite tough now because we've been stretching and stretching and stretching all of that gluten, and so what we're going to do now is give it a minute or so just to relax or rest. So I'm going to pop it on the worktop there. And while I'm waiting, what I'm going to do is grab a large baking tray and I'm going to brush it with some vegetable oil. Now, the vegetable oil is going to stop my rolls from sticking. And if you don't have a pastry brush like this, you can brush it on with some kitchen roll. It doesn't need to be loads, just enough to make sure you've got an even coating over the whole tray. It's going to stop it sticking during the proving process as well as while we're baking it. So it's a super important step, otherwise you'll be chiseling your bread rolls off the tray. So that's nice and covered, so I can pop that to one side. Don't get rid of the oil or the brush yet though, because we're going to need those again. Now let's also move some of these things out of the way. And what you're going to need now is some form of kind of cutter that you can use to cut your dough up into the portions for your rolls. Now I have what's called a bench scraper or a dough scraper that looks like this, but if you don't have one of these, and I'm sure most of you don't, you can just use a knife. You can use the plastic scraper that came with your mixer, anything that's going to let you cut your dough. Now already this is a lot softer than it was, and so all I need to do is cut this into 8 equal portions. So I've rolled it into a kind of a fat sausage shape, and I'm going to cut that in half. So I'll end up with 2 equal pieces. Then I'm going to roll one of those into a sausage again and cut it in half again, and do the same with the other one. Now I've got 4 equal pieces, and now I just need to cut those in half, and that will give me the 8 pieces that I need for my rolls. Now these don't need to be perfectly even, just roughly so that they all cook at the same speed. So there we go, there are my 8 pieces of dough. Now we're not done yet though, because now we need to shape these. And to do that, what I'm going to do is pick one up and fold all of those cut edges towards the bottom. That's going to do 2 jobs. First of all, it's going to make sure there's no ugly seams in my rolls, but also it's going to stretch this top, which means it's going to give me a lovely smooth finish. The last thing I'm going to do is pop this down on the worktop, squash it, and then roll it under my hand to make it into a nice ball shape. And there is my first roll, and that can go onto my tray. Now I'm going to show you what I did there again a bit closer up so that you can see exactly what I was doing. So pick up one of your pieces of dough and fold all of those cuts and creases and everything to the bottom and gather them all together, which gives you that lovely smooth top. Pop that down on the worktop, put your hand on top and start by rolling it with your palm, but gradually lift your hand up until you're almost making like a cage with the roll inside. Keep rolling until you have a lovely round ball, and you should end up with something that looks like this. Now this needs to go onto your tray next to the first one with around about a centimetre gap between the two. What's going to happen when we leave these to proof is they'll gradually grow and they'll join together. So we end up with 8 rolls that are all touching. We call that batch baking. So I'm going to keep doing that for these last 6 and then we'll move on. When you've done that, you should end up with something that looks like this, and you can see they've all got those gaps in between them. And now what we need to do is leave these to proof, which means we need to give them some time for that yeast to do its job and help that dough to rise. Now what can happen while we're leaving it to proof is that it can form a skin on the surface, which means that when we bake it, it will crack and look quite unpleasant. So to stop that happening, I'm going to grab some cling film to lay over the top, but if I just put this straight onto the bread rolls, the cling film will stick to them. So just like we did with the tray, we're going to grab our oil back and our pastry brush, and we're just going to brush some of that vegetable oil over the top of the cling film. Now if you don't have vegetable oil, you can use sunflower oil or a really, really light olive oil, just something that doesn't have much flavour of its own, because otherwise you'll taste it in your bread, and we don't really want to taste that. We want to taste the bread itself. So when you've put a very thin layer of oil over your cling film, what you're going to do is lift it up and flip it over to lay it over your bread rolls really loosely. We don't have to fold it underneath or tuck it or anything. All that's going to do is just stop the air getting to the bread and forming a skin on the surface of the dough. So now I'm going to leave this to proof for 45 minutes. And in that 45 minutes, I'm looking for those rolls to have grown and they should be touching each other. So obviously we're not going to watch for 45 minutes. So we'll jump ahead and I'll show you what they look like after they've proofed. Okay, so it's been 45 minutes and my rolls have expanded to the point that they are now all touching just. But what will happen while they're in the oven is they'll continue to grow. So they'll end up really, really touching. So this is what they look like now. You can see they're just kind of making contact. They're not all exactly the same size, and that's absolutely fine. They're close enough. And now these need to go into a preheated oven at 220 degrees, which is 200 degrees fan, for around about 18 to 20 minutes. Now, during that time, they should go a lovely golden colour, and then when you tap them on the bottom, they should feel hollow. I'll show you what that sounds like at the end, because I remember when I first started baking bread and I'd hear that, I was like, what does that mean? So I'll show you, don't panic. So I'm going to pop these in the oven, and then we'll jump ahead again until they're finished. One quick thing. If you put them in exactly as they are now, they end up a lovely golden brown colour. But if you'd rather more of a kind of a floured bap kind of roll, then do feel free to give them a little bit of a dusting with flour just before you put them in the oven. It's really up to you. I do it both ways, and both ways are absolutely delicious. But anyway, these are going in the oven, and I'll see you in around about 18 to 20 minutes. And only 18 to 20 minutes later, you should have something that looks like this. Now I don't know how well it's showing up on camera, but these have got a lovely golden brown colour, and I will confess actually I took these out of the oven a few minutes ago, so I should be able to gently lift these off and slide them onto a cooling rack or a chopping board or something. You want to get them off the tray quite quickly, because otherwise they can get a little bit slimy on the bottom just where they're still kind of releasing moisture and things. But I did promise to tell you what that hollow sound sounded like. It's almost like a drum, but that tells me that these are fully cooked all the way through. There's no more raw dough inside, and they're ready to eat. Now, With something like a loaf of bread, you do want to leave it for about half an hour or so because it will continue cooking inside. But with smaller things like rolls, you are generally okay to eat them within about 5 to 10 minutes of them coming out of the oven. And if I take one of these off, hopefully you can see that we've got that lovely, soft, fluffy texture. In fact, I'll hold it closer. It's still steaming, look, because it's so warm. And then these are ready to be ripped open or cut open and filled with lashings of salted butter. Now I'm actually going to have these for my lunch today, so I'm going to let them cool down for a little bit longer, and then I'm going to turn them into some filled rolls or some sandwiches. But if you fancy having a go at this week's recipe for my easy bread rolls, then don't forget you'll find the full list of ingredients down in the video description, or of course you can click on the link that will take you to the Kenwood Kids Club website, where you'll find the full written out recipe as well. I do hope you enjoyed learning how to make my easy bread rolls, and if you do have a go at them, don't forget to take a photo and upload them to the Kenwood Kids Club website. I promise to tell you a bit more about our Star Baker of the Month competition, and basically that means every single month we choose one person who's uploaded their version of one of our bakes to be our Star Baker of the Month, and they scoop themselves their very own Kenwood Kids Club goodie bag and their very own Kenwood hand mixer as well. It's a really great prize, and all you have to do is bake. So what are you waiting for? Now I'll be back at the same time next week with another fun and tasty bake-along video, and I'll give you a bit of a hint. We might be making cookies. But until then, as always, take care and happy baking. Bye.